Thank you. So yes, I'm Garrett, and just to kind of introduce myself, I come from a teaching background, so I'm in teaching the third level institute in the university, and for quite a number of years I've been in a management role. So I've been charged with construction management, building engineering, building services, and so on. But recently, now that I have managed to graduate as one of Imre and Horváth's PhD students, they have given me the opportunity now to start building up my research portfolio. So I'm open for business in terms of collaborating with people here, and hopefully we may maybe after this be able to make a joint application for some further funding to help me take the research that I'm doing to the next level. So I suppose just to bring us back, back in 2016 I had this conceptual idea that if I was able to blend social and cognitive enablers with technological enablers, would I be able to bring the real classroom into the virtual reality? So I knew in my head intuitively how to teach a classroom, and I knew in my head when I walk into a procedural workshop, when certain cohorts of students are working together, they're getting the information, they're able to work independently, but I couldn't articulate that. So Imre used to always ask me, he'd say, okay, we've got the conceptual idea, we've got that validated, so how are you going to do it, how will it work? So I had to go back then to the drawing board, and I said, okay, well let's look at the cohort of students that we're thinking of. So I would pretty much consider myself as an analog thinker, but I noticed that my students coming through, the younger generation of students, especially the ones that are in second level education at the moment, they think completely different than I do. And I classified them, or I called them digital thinkers. And I suppose the way that, in order for to make it, for me to understand it, the best analogy I can give is that when I first got a mobile phone, the providers gave me a tariff. They told me I was going to pay this much, and if I continue to use it, I continue to pay more. Whereas if you take the digital society now and social media and so on, the gaming or the digital mind or the digital thinker said, oh, hold on a second, I want the phone, I want the tariff on my terms, I want all you can eat data, I want all you can send text, and I don't want to pay any more than 30 euros a month. So the phone providers, if you like, have changed their contracts around their users, because their users have said this is what we want. And if you bring it into the gaming world, gamers or young people playing games, they get rewards and they move on to the next level and they have cheats and so on. So they're beginning to approach life with the same game rules, so they apply the same game rules to it. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to try and take my old head and rethink it and relook at it. So what I did was I started off with, I got permission from the students themselves, and I just stuck the camera in the room. And for the guts, this is only a few minutes or a few seconds, but there's I have thousands of hours of footage. But I literally just left the camera in the corner, and I continued to teach my classes as normal. But I was also then aware that I have to absorb exactly what's happening. So really, what I was trying to do, and studying the footage afterwards, is I was trying to identify, well, what are the cognitive enablers, what are the social enablers, and then from there on in, how would I go or identify the technology that I was going to use that would blend with the cognitive and the social enablers and provide me with the real world similarity. So basically the technology, when I went searching for the technology, this was the criteria that was in my head. So the criteria was that the actual technology itself would give me the capability to be able to reproduce the classroom environment, would be able to blend with my cognitive and social enablers as identified through actually observation and watching the footages and from my own intuition. And then the other problem that I had as well is that I'm not a computer scientist. I do not have a computer background, so therefore in terms of trying to go and develop any kind of VR, this was really new territory from my point of view. And I know there's a lot of experts here who would do it in their sleep. It could take me 2 or 3 years to come up with something that you might do in half an hour or something like that. So that was the other around it. And of course in my naivety I decided, well, there was going to be just the one piece of software that I was going to learn, and that one piece of software was going to do everything. But I was mistaken because that's not what happened. So as I started to carry out and do some more research, and it's in the paper, you will see that I have identified a number of various different software packages which I had thought were going to be able to resolve my problem and help me on this journey, only to discover that either I didn't have enough digital literacy to be able to learn and manipulate and use the actual software itself, or the other side of it was the cohort that I was dealing with are students. And students are low-end budgets, or they're low budgets, so, and also I wasn't given a research budget. So the scenario that I had was that whatever VR environment that I produced must be compatible with what my students have now. So my students have mid-range mobile phones, smart devices, tablets. So they didn't have the high-end VR, the wearable technology, all of that kind of stuff. So again, some of the software that was out there, because it was such high-end graphics, that when you started to, the hardware that you started to interface with, if it wasn't of the same high-end grade, then you were losing resolution or reality and so on. There was a number of problems, or other problems that I had in terms of, I just wasn't capable, as I said earlier. So after hours and hours and months and years of researching, I eventually came up with, and the first speaker has already introduced you to Unity. I'm sure everybody knows Unity at this stage, but Unity became my development pipeline. And the wonderful thing about Unity was that it's an open software, but it had this library of objects, of pre-modeled objects, which were able to share within the community. But also, it had a community of practice. So, as I said, when I ran into trouble and I wasn't able to write a piece of code, or I couldn't figure out a bug in a piece of code, I found the community of practice were only too willing to come along and share, or I found that I was able just to get into the Unity resource itself and be able to actually buy the piece of software, buy the code, or buy the plug-in package that I needed at a really small price, a relatively small price. So if you like, the overview, this is just an overall architecture of the actual prototype that I built. Each software, each element that was put into it basically was to make sure that I could blend my technological, cognitive and social enablers to be able to mirror what was happening back in the classroom itself. So this is how it works in terms of, as I say, if I was to try and explain the details of the technical, I would get lost in the technical side of it. I was very fortunate as well that there are a number of YouTube videos out there, and there was also a great system, or a company that supplied me Udemy, so they gave me a lot of tutorials. When you get them fairly cheap. So when I was running into problems, I got a lot of tutorials. But as I said, I also got a lot of feedback from students themselves, and some of them took part in the community, on the online community. So what we see here on the left-hand side of the picture is the real-world classroom. The top and bottom pictures is a snapshot of the real-world classroom. And if we look at the top is just a general gauge manifold. And effectively, you can see that it gives something. There's data coming from that. So the data in this particular case is a pressure temperature reading, and then the students take that pressure temperature reading and they decide then if that is normal, if it's abnormal, if there's a problem. So they're able to use that information to determine if there's a problem with the system or how the system operates or the efficiency of the system and so on. On the right-hand side is the VR image that the final VR. Now there was a lot of iterations, but this is the system as it is now. So this VR will actually mirror the exact same attributes. So in other words, what I began to realize is that when I was looking at the video footage, I began to realize there were a number of objects and a number of models. But each one of those objects, if you just produced them as an ordinary 2D drawing or whatever, from my point of view, they had no intelligence. So I needed to find out what were the learning attributes and develop them into actual learning objects. So this actual VR, while it looks good in terms of realistic and it mirrors everything, it also had to have the same intelligence that the real world learning object has. So in this case, I was able to animate the exact same. So as and when the virtual student was able to, or went and fitted the gauge manifold to the actual system, he got the same feedback that the on-site situated learner had. And the other side of it as well is that what I also wanted to make sure was, because my students tend to be, a lot of them tend to be either working part-time, or if they're not working part-time, they're studying part-time. So a lot of them tend to find it difficult to come to campus, and sometimes they miss out. So the idea then as well was to be able to put it on the web so that they could actually dial in from anywhere, or log on from anywhere, and connect from anywhere. And that's where, again, where Unity was great. It gave me the Unity phone networking. So down along here you can see in the real world the three of them are huddled together. There is a specific problem. Each one of them are sharing their interpretation of what the problem is. Each one of them are discussing among each other how they would go and approach to it. So if you like, it's the whole peer-to-peer learning, and I'm as a facilitator just making sure they don't hurt themselves. So again, I had to try and mirror that here in the virtual reality, and I was able to do that with Unity. And I deliberately put this picture down along the bottom because you can see these are the 4 students that are actually online, and they're doing the very same as these students. They're being presented with the exact same problem, and the 4 of them, they're discussing it in the same way as the co-located students. So effectively, the whole idea to start off with was, again, it was to test the conceptual idea and to see if the prototype could be built. So I brought them to a focus group, and the initial one that I brought to the focus group, it was basically where you just, I left it where you just came in and you went around and you found out what was, you kind of clicked and went around and decided what did you want to do. But the feedback that I got was it would be much better if there was some form of instruction, because at the end of the day it was about allowing the students to have 24-hour access, to be able to have independent learning, to be able to have peer-to-peer learning, and then also a tutor to peer learning. So what you actually see in the first video, the first part of the footage was the VR, where the actual instructions. So when you went into the menu, whichever process you wanted to do, the menu gave you the same idea. And then I've just left this up here. This is just me going through the same process and giving the tutorial to the students. So before I allowed the student there on the machine, because obviously there's health and safety, I give the tutorial, I show them how to do it and what to do. And in the same way then, I was asked by the focus group, well, instead of just leaving it where they can actually come along and play around and make mistakes or whatever, can I not give the same tutorial? So if I wasn't live in the thing, to be able to get live in the actual chat room itself, to be able to get the tutorial, the students themselves could decide from the menu, and then they're getting their instructions here. So that allows them then to spend some time building up the cognitive ability, so that when they actually do come into the real classroom and they're faced with the real equipment in the first instance, they have this, at least they have the steps in their head. They may not understand it, but they still know what's the first procedure, so they're not as afraid of it and it's not as alien to them, and so on. So in conclusion then, I discovered that it was possible to put a prototype together, and once I got that prototype validated, and that's in the next paper, the follow-up paper, hopefully for 2018 or before, but it's actually published already in the dissertation. I was able to take that prototype and bring it to a situated field experiment to see how it works in practice with real students. But the other thing that I discovered along the way as a non-computer programmer, that the new generation that are out there, the communities that are out there, they're more than willing to share. So there were times when I was pulling my hair out and scratching my head, and then suddenly somebody would send me a line of code, and all I had to do was cut and paste the code that they sent me and drop it into my own file. And that to me was amazing, because I grew up in an era where everything was being protected, everything was licensed, everything was software. But with this new generation of openware software and openware, people are more willing to share. And as I say, the building services background that I come from, some of the PLCs that I would have been used to working on, again, they have their own gateways and they have their own protections in there. So in conclusion then, I was able to produce the prototype. I was able to get it validated, so the subject matter expert group that I presented it to, they gave me some further feedback to further enhance it. And then I was able to bring it on to the next level, which was to get it tested among the actual students themselves. So that is the end of my